And a pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Devils fans. And as always, what is going on? This is your host, your best friend, your confidant, your number one source, Neil Villapiano. And welcome to another edition of the Devil's State of Mind podcast right here on the Hockey Podcast Network, as well as Sports Wire Radio, the best place to get everything you need to know about your New Jersey Devils. And there's a lot to talk about today. A lot to talk about, a lot of rumors, a lot of different points. It's going to be a fun episode. And if you have not checked out my episode last week with Zach Berman of Locked On Devils, make sure you go check it out. I wish I had him on about 30 minutes earlier or later than we originally recorded, because we were talking about Sheldon Keefe and whether or not he's going to stay on. And then we got the news that he's going to stay on. But our guest today will be the one to give their opinion on the Sheldon Keefe news and a bunch more today. But before we introduce her, really quickly, shout out our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Again, you bet $5 after you sign up with our promo code THPN at DraftKings.com. You bet $5, you get $100 instantly in risk-free bets. With the Stanley Cup playoffs, we're well into the conference finals. We're in kind of a way almost like nearing the Stanley Cup finals with how quickly this conference finals is going. We already have one of the two teams, shout out the New York Knicks, in the NBA Finals. And so we are into the nitty-gritty here. This is the perfect opportunity to get in on all of the huge cash prizes. So again, all you got to do is sign up, use our promo code THPN. You bet $5, you get $100 instantly in risk-free bets. Again, only with DraftKings. The crown is yours. And as always, Devils fans, make sure to bet responsibly. Yes, we have another special guest joining us, another first-timer. I'm getting a lot of first-timers over the last couple of weeks here, and she is a really good friend of mine, and I've gotten to know her for quite a while, and she does a fantastic job. She covers the Seattle Kraken and the New Jersey Devils, as well as the PWHL over at the Hockey Writers. It is with great pleasure that we welcome on my good friend, Jess Amato. Jess, welcome to your first time on the Devil's State of Mind podcast. First and foremost, how are you doing today? I know that things are busy with you in your whole moving to the Garden State, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm excited to have you on. I've been wanting to have you on for quite some time, and I feel like, especially at this point in the off season, where we're really hearing more rumors than really news, and especially involving the Devils, that this is a good time to bring on guests, get their perspective on different topics. And I'm excited to have you on because I know you bring a lot of good expertise to a lot of these subjects. You do a great job, not only, like I said, covering the Devils, but also covering the Seattle Kraken, the PWHL as well, and also covering the Seattle Storm of the WNBA. So you are really on top of it all. You have your finger on the pulse of what is going on in the sports world. And so let's kind of jump right into the first topic. And, it's funny, Jess. This wasn't actually going to be my original first topic because we weren't made known about this until about an hour and a half ago. And this came from Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic talking about Nico Hischier. Now, according to LeBrun, Alan Waugh, who is the agent for Nico Hischier, met with Sonny Mehta about 2 weeks ago, just prior to him going over and meeting with Nico Hischier, Waugh speaking, before the IIHF World Championships began, and they're currently underway as we speak, as we're getting close to the elimination rounds. And this is what Pierre LeBrun had to say about that meeting. My understanding is that so far, those preliminary discussions have been amicable and positive. So there are two factors at play. Mehta is trying to find an extension number that works for both sides while keeping the Devils as competitive as possible under the salary cap. But Hischier also needs to hear all the right things from the new GM as far as getting New Jersey looking like a contender in a hurry. My sense is that those elements were all part of those initial conversations between Waugh and Mehta. All things being equal, it would appear an extension is most likely outcome, but things are at an early and delicate stage. Now, to give you some numbers really quick, Jess, the current projection for Nico Hischier's new contract would be 8 years, between $10 to $11 million. And I know that some people might look at that number and be very surprised, but with the salary cap going up, that's becoming more of a norm that guys are going to get, though, 10, 11 per year. million deals. And that's kind of where Nico Hischier's at. And I think pretty much he's earned that. So overall, I want to get your thoughts on hearing that news from Pierre LeBrun this morning and what you make of it.
Yeah, like you said, the salary cap, the number isn't surprising. And I mean, Nico, he's the captain. He's a cornerstone of the Devils team, it feels like. 8 years to me is a little surprising just because it's a longer contract. He is like getting up there in age. Like, I can't. Hold on.
Do you need me to stop?
I say that, and then he's 27, and I'm turning 27.
You're fine. You're fine. I'm 20. I'm gonna be 29 very soon. So it's funny when we're in a world now where it's like they say, I say that like, oh, this guy's so young or so old, and I'm like, dude, you're nearly 30.
Yeah.
Like, relax.
But in the
yeah,
sports world, it's like
Mhm.
they're older and more of a veteran and getting to their prime, like getting out of their prime.
Mhm.
So, I mean, he's on contract until 2026-27. So that brings us to him being 28. And then, 8 years? He'll be 36. So I guess it makes sense in the long run. I mean, we have other players who are older. Look at Ovechkin, but obviously you can't really compare
Right.
Hischier and Ovechkin. But I mean, I definitely can see Nico coming back. He has been with the Devils the entire time of his career. And like I said, he's a cornerstone. He's the captain. It just feels right for him to come back to New Jersey.
And it should be mentioned also that at the end of the season, meeting with the media, that Hischier spoke about, he's been with the organization now for 9 years, which it's crazy how quickly time flies, right, in an NHL career. And he talked about how much he loves being in New Jersey. And he's talked numerous times before about wanting to win a Stanley Cup with the New Jersey Devils. But he also did mention about he wants to see what the new GM's plan is, what kind of guys he brings in, and ultimately what that vision is. And I think that that's what Meta certainly tried to present to his agent, and I'm sure his agent has presented it to him. It'll be very interesting to see how things progress. One thing that actually should just be mentioned really quickly when you talk about the 8 years, if he does not sign an extension prior to September 1st, then he can only sign a 7-year deal. So he gets that extra year if he does sign that extension prior to September 1st under the new CBA ruling. So I don't know if that necessarily makes that big of a difference, but ultimately, if Nico Hischier were to sign a 7 or 8 year deal, you could feel fairly certain that he's going to finish out his entire career as a member of the New Jersey Devils. But again, as LeBrun did mention, things are at a delicate stage right now. It's all about getting to know the GM, getting to know the player, and ultimately talking with the GM to see what happens. So that was kind of a little bit of an interesting tidbit to drop in today. Very interesting that LeBrun brings this up 2 weeks after the fact, but maybe this is the first that he's been made aware of this first meeting. I know Meta's also spoke with Hischier in the past a couple of times. So all things are positive, but as we know in this business, Jess, anything can change at a moment's notice. So we shall see what ultimately happens with both of them. And that was impressive, actually. I've done this so many times with with this. But let's move on to our next topic, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Shimon Nemec. Now, as we all know, Nemec has been the subject of trade rumors for over a year now. It's been a constant talking point. And with this year coming up, going to the offseason, he is a restricted free agent. And we got some kind of interesting notes, kind of like a back and forth, almost like a he said, she said kind of situation, which Nemec last week involving some media outlets over in Slovakia, Shimon Nemec's native country. Now, Simon Kopp of thenvpshow.bsky claimed that Nemec requested a trade and hasn't spoken with Devils' new general manager, Sonny Mehta. Now, there was a follow-up the very next day, or excuse me, the same day, with a report coming out from Thomas Rokop, a Slovak hockey insider, also for Denic Sport, who has written stories on Nemec before and wrote that the Devils defenseman did not ask for a trade and has spoken with Sonny Mehta. So it's kind of like, well, who's really telling the truth here? And I've spoken about this several times already, that the reason that I lean more towards listening to Thomas Rokop is that Rokop has spoken with Nemec numerous times in the past and has been fairly consistent with his reporting. So it's it's much more leaning towards that Nemec definitely did not ask for a trade request. At no point has he requested a trade, and he has expressed, even at the end of his season presser, that he wants to remain a New Jersey Devil. So ultimately, just what do you think of the situation right now with Nemec? And ultimately, what do you want to see the Devils decide to do? Do you want to see them pursue to try to re-sign him, or are you looking maybe more towards looking to move him for other assets?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation, especially he played his first full season with New Jersey, and it seemed like he came out with a vengeance. He wanted to prove that he deserves a spot on this team because he previously played with the Utica Comets and spent some time with New Jersey, but like off and on, and he felt like he needed to be in the NHL. He didn't want to play in any of the minor leagues, even though there's nothing wrong with playing in the NHL. Um, but at the end of the day, he is going to be a restricted free agent. The Devils have plenty of defensemen already on the team. They have Dougie Hamilton, they have Jonas Siegenthaler, they have I'm blanking.
Jonathan Kovacevic,
Yeah.
Brenden,
Yes.
Dillon. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Luke Hughes.
Of course, Luke Hughes.
Yes.
Yep.
And they have all these players that are already signed to longer contracts, at least. And with Simon Nemec, it's interesting because, of course, he wants to play with the Devils, he wants to play with the team, but whether or not they actually have the spot for him, it kind of puts that into perspective. I mean, yeah, several of the Devils players were injured, so he ended up getting more ice time than maybe he initially anticipated for the season. I would like to see the Devils re-sign him. However, I wouldn't be surprised if he did go somewhere else just for the sole fact that he wants to get the ice time.
I think that's all very fair. I know that Dougie Hamilton is still a name out there in terms of a potential trade candidate. The last that we heard is that Dougie Hamilton still would probably like to be moved, and perhaps Meta and Co will try to find a deal later in the offseason that ultimately works. I would expect it to be probably after July 1st, so that once his signing bonus gets paid out, then the Devils can make it a bit easier to ultimately move him. So I think what will be kind of telling is which domino falls first. Does Nemec sign an extension and then Dougie Hamilton gets moved? Or does Dougie Hamilton get moved and then Nemec ultimately signs? It'll be a very interesting point because we know with Dougie Hamilton, $9 million cap hit. If the Devils can get that off the books, that's a huge, huge bonus for them, not just to re-sign Nemec, but to re-sign other guys like Arseny Gritsyuk, potentially bring back Paul Cotter, and also look to try to retool the team with free agents and other trades as well. But I'm in the same boat as you, Jess. I would rather the Devils re-sign him and keep him rather than move him, because when you have a talent like him, you don't get that many opportunities to have him, and you might as well keep him. And I know the Devils need help with the forward core, but there are other ways that the Devils can figure out that issue without having to move an asset like Nemec. Should also be mentioned really quickly. I love using this website, and I love associated with these guys because they're awesome. AYP Analytics. If you haven't already, go follow them on Twitter. They put out predictions for both a short-term and a long-term deal for Simon Nemec. And I wanted to get your opinion really quickly, Jess, on which one sounds maybe more appealing given who Nemec is right now as a player. So in terms of a short-term deal, they're looking at a projection of 2 years at $4.47 million per year. And a long-term contract would be 7 years at just over $8 million per year. So I kind of feel like I know what your answer is going to be, but I am curious as to which deal do you think is perhaps maybe more fair for not just Nemec, but also for the Devils as well?
I feel like the short-term deal is better for both the Devils and for Nemec because, as you said, the cap hit is also going to go up. So if he wants to, make more money in the future, then he can, start out. I mean, 4.47, like you said, is not a small number.
No, comparatively to what he was making on his ELC, it's a significant pay raise.
Yes, exactly. But I just think that, short term, he can stay with the Devils. The Devils love to sign players to long contracts, but I think maybe now with Sonny Meta in the chair, maybe he will start giving out some smaller contracts, but it gives Nemec the chance to grow with New Jersey. And then if he decides, maybe at the end of the 2 years, this isn't the fit for me and I want to go somewhere else, then he has that option.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment overall. And I know that people were talking about, oh, Nemec is going to ask for Luke Hughes money, and from people that I've spoken to and the source that I have, Nemec is not looking for Luke Hughes money. Ultimately, he's looking for a fair deal that also gives him the opportunity to play, like you mentioned, more minutes. And if you move someone like Dougie Hamilton, that will give Nemec an opportunity to play higher up in the lineup consistently. And that's going to be something that both Sonny Mehta and also Sheldon Keefe are going to have to discuss as well, about where they see in terms of that projection. And I think also Meta should look at some of the things that former Devils GM Tom Fitzgerald did speak about when it came to Nemec. And, he was a little bit, Fitzgerald was a lot more just nonchalant about Nemec and wasn't really guaranteeing a whole lot. I'm curious to see where Meta's overall opinion is of this player and his evaluation. But again, we won't know till probably another month or two down the road. So again, these are things that we are hearing. Ultimately, what we do know is that Nemec has not requested a trade and that the goal is still for the New Jersey Devils and Simone Nemec to ultimately come to an agreement. But again, as we just talked about with Hischier, things can absolutely change at any single point. So that's something to certainly keep in mind when we look at this whole situation. So speaking of Sheldon Keefe, we did get some news last week that maybe to some was a surprise, but I would say for myself was not much of a surprise, as we got news from Sonny Mehta officially that Sheldon Keefe would return for his third season as the bench coach for the New Jersey Devils. We also got the news that Devils fans have been wanting for the better part of 7 or 8 years now, and that is Dave Rogalski will not be returning as the Devils goaltending coach. Hallelujah, changes are coming. I cannot tell you the amount of excitement that I got from just that announcement. It should also be mentioned that Sergei Brenden will not continue as an assistant coach with Sheldon Keefe, but he will remain in the organization in a different capacity. So the Devils will be looking for at least one more assistant coach and a new goaltending coach as well to pair with Sheldon Keefe, while Bradshaw and Jeremy Colleton will remain as the other two assistants with Sheldon Keefe. But Jess, your initial reaction to Mehta ultimately keeping Sheldon Keefe on as head coach next season?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. Sheldon Keefe is, in my opinion, a decent coach, and it's his second season with the Devils. He brought them to the playoffs last season. However, ultimately a first round exit, but I mean, they still made the playoffs. And this season, it was a weird one because they had so many injuries. They had to make so many different line combinations that, yeah, they were strong to start. Obviously, they had a 9-0 run, I believe, after losing their first game in Carolina. And then after the Olympics, they went downhill. There's no denying that. But at the end of the day, they had so many injuries, like I said. I mean, you have the Jack Hughes injury, so many other situations that happened that you couldn't really have a full season. Like, I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, but I do get your point, because I think, ultimately it's a situation where, Keefe, he spoke about it right at the end of last season where he said, I know what this team needs. And I think that Mehta wants to give him the opportunity to kind of prove that the lack of success was much more of a roster construction than it necessarily was a coaching situation.
Yeah,
so I think
100%.
Yeah. And I think that would be the fair point. So ultimately, I know, again, some people are upset about it. I know that there are some names out there, Bruce Cassidy, Chris Knobloch, but I think it's fair to say, based on, based on everything, is that, you know, that Sheldon Keefe ends up being the best option for the Devils at this time. Now, would it be fair to say, Jess, in your opinion, that this is a very short leash kind of situation? Or do you think that Sheldon Keefe has a little bit more leeway given the fact that there's a new GM in charge?
I feel like it would be a short leash situation, and it's all going to depend on whether or not they make the playoffs next season. I know that they want to win a cup. They're with this construction of Hischier and Jack Hughes and all those stronger players. They're trying to build around them. And if they can manage to do that this offseason and they can get a contender team so that they can get to those playoffs for 2026, 2027, I think then maybe Keefe will get another year than a next season. But at this point, it's all going to depend on how this upcoming season goes and whether or not he remains with the team.
Well said. And it should be mentioned also that when Sheldon Keefe was hired, he signed a 4-year contract. So this will be year 3 of a 4-year deal that he is currently under. And again, it's going to be very interesting to see if things don't improve right away, how much Sheldon Keefe's seat gets hotter. And I think that that's really going to be a big thing to keep our eye on once the season kind of gets underway. But again, we have a lot of time between now and when the 26-27 season actually gets underway. Now, the next thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on is a bit more, I don't want to say controversial, but it was pretty damning considering the kind of statements that Brenden Dillon made on a podcast called the Donnie and DeHolly Show. He was on there last week, and he spoke about how this season went. And a couple of the comments that he put out were kind of like not surprising, but also like very shocking to hear. One of them was, we had a lot of elephants in the room this year saying things like, is this guy upset because this guy's got more ice time? I should be playing where that guy's playing. I wish I was playing with that guy. And saying we had too many distractions. And, he talked about that there was some toxicity in the Devils locker room. And that kind of goes back to what we heard from Friedman about the fact that the riff in the locker room really started with the whole Quinn Hughes situation and whether or not the Devils were ultimately going to get Quinn Hughes, and then hearing about certain players were asked to waive no trade clauses and, players said no, most likely talking about at least Dougie Hamilton. And so Brenden Dillon just kind of brought it all back together saying that we had way too many distractions and there was so much going on that we could never get it going. And to me, Jess, that kind of helps Sheldon Keefe's situation out even more because it just kind of proves that, again, Keefe could only do so much to get the team going. He is the coach and he's talking to the players on a daily basis. But with everything that was going on with management and with what Tom Fitzgerald was doing, it just seemed like it was one thing after another, and the Devils could never really kind of relax in the locker room. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are from Brenden Dillon talking about the toxicity that was in the Devils locker room throughout this year.
Yeah, it was surprising to see those clips circulating on social media and just hearing it from the source instead of, rumors from Elliot Friedman or Pierre LeBrun. Like, you're hearing it from Brenden Dillon. So there's a lot of legitimacy behind what he's saying. And like you said, it gives Sheldon Keefe that opportunity to, have more of a chance to get his coaching foot on the right track. Because, yeah, like you said, with the Quinn Hughes trade, I feel like it could have, obviously benefited the Devils in the long run. But whether or not everyone else on the team would have been happy about Quinn Hughes coming in, it could have changed things. Because as we mentioned before about Simone Nemec, getting more ice time as a defender with Quinn Hughes coming in, that could have been limited. He could have been sent to the AHL. We don't know. It didn't happen.
Right.
But it's one of those situations where, it's what could have happened type thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's also likely that Nemec would have been involved in a Quinn Hughes trade as well, which obviously for Nemec's case in terms of playing time, he certainly would have ended up getting a lot more playing time playing over in Vancouver. But again, like you said, we'll never know because obviously the Devils could not make that deal work. And ultimately, Quinn Hughes was traded to Minnesota. And now we'll see if Quinn Hughes does decide to re-sign long-term in Minnesota or how that all goes. So, but again, this was, I really appreciated that Brenden Dillon was so honest about it and that he was not afraid to just talk about it. And he said he spoke to Sonny Mehta about it because Mehta was asking everybody what went wrong. And he wanted them to be honest. He wanted them to be blunt about it. And that's great because then everybody knows where everybody stands. And that's kind of very interesting with that. And I know some people are also on the fence about whether the Devils should keep Brenden Dillon going into next year, maybe another guy that becomes a cap casualty. Who knows? But again, just having someone like a veteran presence like a Brenden Dillon to be honest, to speak about these things and talk about what was really going on in the locker room, I think is very, very important. And it gives Sonny Mehta more to work with. And I will also say this. I am fairly certain that everything that Brenden Dillon said in that interview, he already said to Sonny Mehta. Like this shouldn't be like, I'm sure it wasn't a shock for Mehta to hear online, given the fact that he probably already knew about it because he asked Brenden Dillon what was going on. So overall, very damning thing to say. But again, it feels necessary. It felt necessary to
100%.
talk about. And that was also why I liked a lot of the things that Sheldon Keefe said this year about have a lot to work to do to become a real hockey team, talking about the team's mental toughness. All of these things are, I feel, very important. And it's a breath of fresh air when guys are just more brutally honest instead of giving that typical, player interview kind of answer and just saying, oh, we just got to keep working on it or whatever. Just being honest I think is really, really great. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is involving the PWHL and also involving the New Jersey Devils, because last week we got word that Megan Duggan, who has been working with the New Jersey Devils as Director of Player Development, is leaving the New Jersey Devils and becoming the new general manager of one of the 4 new expansion teams in the PWHL. I believe it's Hamilton, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
It is Hamilton. And so, again, Megan Duggan has been with the New Jersey Devils organization for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years, being hired by Tom Fitzgerald and working in player development. Whether or not you want to say she quote unquote did a good job does not matter in this situation. Ultimately, she now gets an opportunity to be the head honcho of a professional hockey team, her first GM opportunity. So, Jess, what are your thoughts on Megan Duggan now becoming one of the newest GMs in the ever-growing Professional Women's Hockey League?
First off, I just want to say, I know expansion has been, a touchy subject, but
Yep.
I'm just excited to see
Very touchy.
the growth of women's hockey. Like, at the end of the day, women's hockey growing is a great thing.
There you go.
Yeah. But besides that, I think it'll be great for Megan Duggan to be in a leadership position. She has obviously been with the Devils with the Director of Player Management. So she has kind of that behind the bench insight. Obviously not at the same level as a general manager, but I think her knowledge will be beneficial to growing Hamilton to be a decent team.
And it should also be mentioned, in case you're not aware of the growth of the PWHL, they expanded to 4 new teams going into next season, so they'll up to 12. So we have Hamilton, which is the team that Megan Duggan will be the GM of. You have San Jose, Vegas, and Detroit. And I didn't say it in that order of when they were announced, but it doesn't matter. So ultimately, there will be 12 teams going into next year, and it's going to be a fascinating year for the PWHL after this huge amount of growth that they had with the league, its play, ultimately what happened in the Olympics and helping that grow the game. And now Megan Duggan leaves the NHL and leaves the New Jersey Devils in a player development role and gets, I guess you would say, promoted to a higher opportunity, is now a GM of a professional women's hockey team. And so from everyone here at the Devils, we wish her nothing but the best. Really going to be interesting for the Devils, who they ultimately look to try to bring in as the next director of player development. Brian McCabe who's currently in Toronto. That was a name that was brought up as a potential assistant GM for Sonny Meta, although Braden Birch ended up getting that job. It's possible that maybe the Devils go back to McCabe about the possibility of becoming the new director of play development for the Devils, but we will see as Sonny Meta continues to round out his staff and ultimately what he wants to see in his vision building this team. But again, Megan Duggan leaves her position as director of player development for the New Jersey Devils to become the general manager of the newly expanded PWHL Hamilton team. So I thought I'd get your thoughts on that because it kind of worked together with what you cover. Now, the
Yeah, of
last
course.
thing I want to quickly share with you that is a little bit more fun is Ice Aesthetics yesterday on Twitter put out a video and also just put out a couple tweets about the fact that every team in the NHL next year is getting a brand new alternate jersey. We've already seen some leaks. We saw one with the New York Islanders. We saw the Florida Panthers as well. We saw what could be a leak from the Anaheim Ducks. But in that video, they talked about every single team and they spoke about the Devils and said that the Devils will be looking to have another black jersey. So as we know, the jersey, its time is coming past, and that is now the past. And now the Devils will be getting a new alternate, and it's really interesting that they want to keep the black jersey going. And AC Concepts, Artie Carell, who does all of my game day posts and graphics, has been doing it for several years. Great guy and good friend of mine. He put out this one that I think, honestly, would to me personally is the most perfect. What would be perfect, alternate jersey here for the Devils in terms of a black jersey with the NJ logo, removing the circle, so kind of going back to the Stadium Series jersey. I think ultimately we're going to get something like we saw from the Stadium Series. You saw what Carolina did this past year with their new road uniforms, kind of a white version of their Stadium Series. But if the Devils could get something like this, I think it would be an absolute home run. But just ultimately, what are your thoughts on this design and also just on what you would like to see the Devils ultimately do with a new third jersey?
I like this mock-up a lot. I like that the primary color swap, so the red is the accent, whereas the black is like the focus. Um, I feel like this would be a fantastic alternate jersey. Ultimately, I would like to see something fun. Like whether or not you like the jersey, I thought it was, something different. It was kind of fun. But something like this would be, along those lines.
And I think that's fair. And I think ultimately Devils fans and hockey fans in general, they want to see, fanatics in the NHL come together and create some really, really, like you said, fun designs and things that can really be, popular and ultimately that will boost jersey sales and things like that. And we will see how things progress with that. I think probably I'm going to guess that maybe sometime in I'll go with August or September. We'll probably find out ultimately what teams will do. But if the Devils can do something like this or exactly like this, I think we could all agree that it would be pretty close to a home run. So
Yeah.
we'll keep our eye on that. But it was kind of interesting that Ice Aesthetics came out and put out a video. If you haven't already, go check out that video. I'll actually put the video in the description here on YouTube for you guys to go check out so you guys can see what we're talking about. But it's going to be really, I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because it is Fanatics and I sometimes get disappointed, as we all do with these jerseys. But on that note, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Devil State of Mind podcast. Jess, thank you so much for coming on today and taking some time out of your busy schedule again with moving and all of the coverage that you do to be on this episode. But before I let you go, because I like to do this with all my guests, I like to roll out the red carpet and let the people get a chance to figure out where they can find more of your work and anything you got going on. So the floor is yours, my friend.
All right. So I am on Twitter at Jess Amato Writes. I am on BlueSky at Jess Amato Writes, and I'm on Threads at Jess.Amato. So if you're interested in any of my work, both with the NHL, the PWHL, and as well as the WNBA, you can find it all there.
Yeah, and so in case anybody is just listening to the episode, I'm showing currently Jess's page over on the Hockey Writers. Just search Jess Amato on the Hockey Writers, and you can find it. Again, she covers the Seattle Kraken, she covers the New Jersey Devils and the PWHL, and also she does coverage covering the WNBA's Seattle Storm as well. So she's got a lot going on, and again, we really do appreciate you, Jess, coming on today and taking some time to join us, and we will definitely have you on the podcast again. But one more time, thank you so much for being on today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil. It was a blast.